Hello, check, check, check. I wonder if I can be heard now. Um, is anyone is anyone out there? Can you hear me at this point? I don't know. Hello, hello, checkity, check, check, check. Okay. I wonder. Can you guys hear me? It says it's picking up the audio when I am speaking, and then I also have this going on here. That's picking up the audio, so I wonder if I can be heard at this point. Oh, excellent. Thanks. I appreciate that. I don't know why. This is why we do the test runs because OBS put a new update out. And so now apparently you need to have a separate input for the video and the audio. That was always just kind of automatic. Okay, cool. Well, then let's start back over again. Good morning. Saturday morning, hanging out, just giving some announcements, talking about various things, seeing what's going on, who's around, talking philosophy and all that good stuff. So I was giving some updates about um, Consciousness Live, my interview slash discussion series, which I do. And I was saying that I'm trying to bring it back at a more consistent rate. So in the past, what I would do is I would email a bunch of people and then they would all get back to me and be like, yeah, I can do it. How about tomorrow? I could do it. How about the next week? So I would like get, 3 or 4 in a month. At one point I was doing one per week. And this time I'm trying to keep it a little more organized so that it doesn't interfere too much with my teaching and other things that are going on, and I'm trying to keep it to one a month. And I've got it scheduled all the way up through April at this point. But probably someone's going to get back to me and be like, "Oh yeah, I could do it next week." And if that's the case, then I'll throw maybe a couple more in there. But at this point, I have a pretty good lineup for the next few months. Just to let you guys know. So next week on the 18th of December, that's Wednesday at noon, I'll be talking with Josh Weisberg, philosopher at the University of Houston, and he has a new book that just came out called Explanatory Optimism in the Philosophy of Mind or something like that. Is that what it's called? Explanatory Optimism? Um, it's no one actually really cares, but I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Yeah, explanatory optimism about the hard problem of consciousness. Okay, so it's not just philosophy of mind. So I've known Josh for a long time. We went to grad school together. He was just finishing when I started, so someone whose work I'm familiar with. But this book that he just came out with, which was published by, was it Rutgers? Routledge. Yeah, Routledge. Published by Routledge is interesting and a good statement of his views. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk with him. We don't agree on very much, but whatever. So that's Wednesday, December 18th, Josh Weisberg. And then for next month in January, I have Peter Langland-Hassan, another guy that I know pretty well, used to hang out with when we also went to grad school together. Now he's at the University of Cincinnati, and he has a book with Oxford that just came out recently called Explaining Imagination, which is very interesting and cool. And so we'll be talking about his book, Explaining Imagination, in January. And that's January 24th at 1 p.m. So you could see in the live, I have these already set up. So that's for the next couple months. And then I have some other interesting people that may be coming up. I'm hopefully going to talk with the magician, Mark Mitten, and the philosopher Arnold Zuboff, who thinks that there's only one self, that we are all the same self. That's an interesting idea. And a few other people as well. So keep stay tuned for that if you're interested. If anyone suggests anyone to me, I will reach out to them. Some of the more interesting conversations I've had on Consciousness Live were because people said, hey, you should reach out to this guy. Like, for instance, Bernardo Kastrup. I didn't know who that was until someone said you should talk to him. And that turned out to be fun. Anyway, okay. So, and there's a couple other people as well. So keep that in mind. If you suggest someone, I will more than likely reach out to them. I have my own ideas. I'm hopefully trying to harass some people into showing up that keep, rescheduling and dodging me. So we'll see how that goes. In addition to that, I'm also going to be on the Mark Gagnon podcast at Camp Gagnon. If you don't know about Mark's podcast, he's a comedian. I think he's the co-host of Flagrant, another kind of YouTube podcast channel. I don't really watch that channel, but they seem to have a lot of subscribers. And then Mark started his own podcast called Camp Gagnon, where he has conversations. I actually went on and talked with him last year, and the episode hasn't come out yet, but they tell me it's going to come out soon, someday maybe. So that'll be cool. And then this time I'm going back for a live episode. So they've been starting to do live episodes, and I'm scheduled to show up on his podcast January, what is it? January 22nd, I believe, at 11 a.m. and that'll be live. So, we don't have to worry about the the podcast being in the bank for a long time. So that'll be fun. I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about, but I didn't know what we were going to talk about last time either. So he's a smart, interesting guy, and that should be fun. So that's what's going on for December and January, and then I'll kind of be making more announcements as things line up. You can watch, you keep your eye on the live part of my channel if you're interested in that sort of stuff. It's been rough. I've been meaning to get this Consciousness Live thing back on track, but I've been busy writing my book, getting that taken care of. I've been busy teaching as always. The semester just ended. We're about finished up with finals at this point, just finishing all the grading. So speaking of the book, it should be out next year. I've got the cover. I'm very excited about. Just about to get the proofs. Start going over that. So that's what I'm working on currently. So at this point, I finished the book last year in December. So it's been a long time. In my opinion, since I've been finished with the book. I'm kind of anxious for it to come out. It was originally supposed to come out in January of 2025, but because of snafus behind the scenes, it got pushed back till March/April. So that's where we're at right now. But, if anyone cares about this stuff, I'm more than happy to send you a copy of it and torture you with my views about consciousness and higher order theories and neuroscience and all of that sort of stuff. So that's kind of the announcements at this point. Interesting things going on. Also, I've been hanging out over on Blue Sky. I've been off Twitter for a while, so I'm getting into various discussions over there. Possible that I'll set up a discussion with Philip Goff talking about whether a God of limited power is a plausible hypothesis to explain fine-tuning and the problem of evil. Hint, hint, no, it's not, in my opinion. So, me, I'm kind of a no gods, no masters type of guy. So I don't think there's any serious reason to entertain the possibility of the existence of a God. However, I do think that there's some reason to think that we might be living in a simulation, and I believe that the simulation hypothesis is more convincing. Not that I believe it. That's not what I'm saying. I think if you had to pick between believing in God and believing in the simulation hypothesis, that the simulation hypothesis is by far the more credible option. Although neither of them ultimately are, things that we should fully commit to, in my view. So maybe that'll happen. I don't know where, but on Blue Sky, he said, why don't we have a chat about this publicly in the new year, next year? And I said, that sounds like a lot of fun. So we'll see how that shapes up. So lots of things may be happening with respect to the YouTube channel in the new year. And as always, I've been putting in my 2 cents defending physicalism here and there. It just really bothers me that people kind of confidently assert that physicalism is false. As people may or may not know, my own view is that we don't have any reason to think that physicalism is false. Not to say that I think that it's true necessarily. I think it is the view that's most supported by the evidence that we have, in my opinion, but I could also see how people might take a different view about the evidence. So my real claim about physicalism is that we don't know if it's false, and it could possibly be true. So it might actually be true, but that doesn't mean that I know that it's true, and I wouldn't go around saying that I know that dualism is false either. So what really gets my goat is when people kind of just confidently say, "Oh, physicalism, what a silly view! Like no one should believe that. It's clearly false, like obviously false." That's the sort of stuff that troubles me. I think that we should have more humility and more of an open mind about these sorts of things, so that they should all be sort of considered life options. I have also been defending the view that physicalism is the scientifically acceptable thesis, the one that fits best with what we think of as deliverances from science and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we are at this point. Yeah, so if anyone's out there and they're hanging around at this period of time and they wanted to talk about something, I'd be happy to chat with anyone who happens to be around. If you have any questions or you want to come at me about any of these things that I've been saying. So let me know about that. I probably won't hang around too much longer online if there's nothing really going on. However, if for the next few minutes or whatever, it does look like there was a couple people around at one point. Yeah, I don't really have too much of an agenda. I don't even know if Saturday mornings are like an appropriate time to be hanging out live on YouTube. I was mostly trying to check and see if the Zoom link is working, because what I do for Consciousness Live is I use Zoom to talk to people, and then I stream it through OBS to the YouTube channel. So it's kind of an annoying house of cards that gets built up there. So yeah, if anyone, yeah. So by the way, if anybody wanted to jump into the Zoom link and talk to me face to face, you could do that. I put the link into the chat. Usually what I do is I don't do that for the Consciousness Live discussions, but I'm happy to do it for these kinds of more ridiculous hangout sessions where I don't really have anything planned and I'm just kind of flapping my gums, checking to see if I know how to work all the various things that I used to know how to work. Interesting. What's been going on out there in YouTube land? Doesn't look like much is going on at this point. Okay, well, I guess if there's nothing really going on, then we can sort of wrap this up. Once again, just to repeat myself, I was just checking to see if I knew how to use OBS. I still can stream from Zoom through OBS to YouTube, that everything was working out. As it turns out, I was needing some feedback and giving you a little bit of updates about who's going to be showing up on Consciousness Live. I have some interesting guests coming up, and I'm very excited about that. I'm also happy to chat with anybody who happens to be around. So I put the Zoom link in the chat, and if you wanted to go ahead and come and harass me, ask me questions, argue with me, tell me I suck, then that would be most appreciated. But of course, you don't need to be doing that. All right, so I'll probably hang out for a couple more minutes and see if anyone's around. And after that, I'll probably, what was that? Something just happened with the stream. Anyway, so after that, I'll probably wrap up then and get back to doing something that looks more like work. So Oops. Okay. I guess I was also going to mention, so just to sum up, I was talking about Consciousness Live. I got a couple guests lined up, trying to do one a month. I've got Josh Weisberg, Peter Langland-Hassan coming up for December and January. There's more people scheduled after that, but I'll talk about them later since it's sort of further away. I got this appearance on the Camp Gagnon podcast coming up in January. Possible debate / chat with Philip Goff about what explains the existence of evil, a God of limited power, or us being in the simulation. So I have some various things coming up. I'm also thinking about doing more reaction videos. I haven't done one of those in a while. I think the last one I did was to the discussion with Philip Goff, actually. But I'm always interested in doing more of those. So if people have something that they are, think is interesting and want me to check out, go ahead, feel free to send it to me or, comment, send a link, and I'll check that out. So generally going to be trying to get the YouTube channel back up to shape in the new year. If you've been around lately, you probably noticed that all I've really been doing is posting logic videos. I've been teaching a hybrid online introduction to logic class, and for a long time I've been meaning to record some videos for that class, and I sort of got around to it recently, so that's mostly what I've been doing with my YouTube channel for the last few months for this fall semester. So really excited to be getting back to Consciousness Live. Always looking for recommendations. So if anyone has any recommendations, then feel free to send them my way, and I'll reach out to them. If anyone wants to talk about physicalism or science or the existence of God or lack thereof, then feel free to let me know if you have any comments or criticisms, arguments I made, or questions. Or feel free to jump into the Zoom link, which I put into the chat. So it looks like I've got a good handle on the details here as far as the Zoom is working, the YouTube is working, OBS is working. So all of that stuff seems to be working. Basically just stalling to see if anyone wants to talk to me. Maybe it's too early for Saturday morning for these kind of shenanigans. People don't really feel all super philosophical this early in the morning. You know me, I'm an early riser, so I tend to get up around between 4:30 and 5 a.m. Not for any good reason. I just usually wake up around that time. And I could go back to sleep, but then I start thinking about what I have to do that day, and then therefore get up. So for me, it seems sort of late. I've been up already for a few hours. It's still too cold to even do any sort of things at the skate park, so that's why I'm testing out the YouTube and seeing what's going on. All right, so what's going on with you guys, and who's out there? What are you guys thinking about, talking about lately? Looks like we're getting a few people in today in now. So once again, just summarizing, I've been talking about announcements for the channel, what I'm going to be doing with respect to Consciousness Live, a couple of guests coming up, etc. Also looking to see who's out there and what they want to chat about or argue about. I guess I should have titled the video something more controversial, and then I get some people in. So the video was there is no God and consciousness is physical. Not that I necessarily believe those things, by the way. So my view is that we probably don't really know the answers to these questions. That doesn't mean we can't evaluate evidence and think about which hypothesis is more reasonable, um, and which is better supported by the evidence, which is really my what my spiel is all about. But on the other hand, what really gets me irritated is when people think they know this. People say physicalism is obviously false, easily refuted. That's when I tend to start defend it. So people tend to think of me as a physicalist because I'm always defending physicalism. But when people come around and talk bad about idealism, I tend to defend idealism too. Um, it's harder for me in my like, sometimes I get annoyed by the kinds of arguments um, that people give. Hey, Info Boy, how's it going? Um, uh, am I going to take Philip Goff on a public chat about possibility? Or yeah, exactly. I was talking about that earlier. So I hope that I will be able to take him up on that. Absolutely, yes. So I don't know where he intended that we have this public chat. I mean, he has a podcast. I have a podcast, YouTube channel, etc. So wherever it takes place, in person would be cool too. Although he's over across the pond. But yes, absolutely, that would be very good to have that discussion. I mean, I reacted to a video of him announcing his big conversion to to Christianity, or at least some version of Christianity. I always am kind of sad when that happens, that people feel like they need to believe in these sort of things, to satisfy some desire to, like, I don't know, they're getting old or something. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of the idea that there's a God of limited power. I don't think it's a very good explanation for the data that we have. So that doesn't mean that I know that it's false, but I certainly think that the idea that we live in a simulation is, in every way that you could imagine, more plausible than the existence of any kind of God. However, I don't think that we really live in a simulation. I don't really believe that. I think that you can't rule it out, and that I'm kind of convinced by the Chalmers style argument that you can't have a 0 degree of belief in it, that you can't just say, look, I know it's false. Um, but if you're comparing that to the claim about existence of God, then it becomes eminently more plausible, in my opinion. It explains all the data much cleaner, more nicely. And I think that the arguments that people use to try to support the existence of God tend to only really support um, the simulation hypothesis. So I do kind of have the view that a lot of people may not even realize that they're worshiping simulators if they're really not thinking through the arguments that they are giving, which is somewhat surprising. And in fact, thinking about the simulation hypothesis, I used to be a bit more agnostic than I am about the existence of God. Um, I used to really sort of think there was very good evidence on both sides for the existence of God, and that the best thing to do would be to withhold judgment. That was kind of my view like 2 or 3 years ago. But thinking about the simulation hypothesis has made me less agnostic, uh, in the sense that I tend to think there's not as much good evidence on the other side, um, for God's existence, which can't be um, explained by the simulation hypothesis. So it has tended to make me a bit more of a hardline atheist, which was my default view when I was younger. And then we start teaching philosophy of religion courses, and you start realizing, okay, these things are complicated. There's a lot of debate, a lot of arguments on either side. And I became much more agnostic. I was agnostic in the sense that I really thought, like, there's good evidence, not just that we don't know, but um, in a more hardcore sense of agnosticism, where I thought that, so if you think about Russell's teapot, that old famous argument that Russell made, that, he's agnostic about the existence of a teapot orbiting Jupiter or Saturn or something like that. I forget which planet, but we just can't know whether there is such a teapot that's orbiting. Maybe now we could, but when he said it, we couldn't. So that kind of is a weak agnosticism where you're just saying, look, I don't know. He was agnostic about the existence of Zeus and all those guys. So I always thought that no, we could rule out Zeus, we could rule out Santa Claus. We don't have to be agnostic about those things. However, um, the agnosticism which I was more defending at that time was that we have evidence which points in the direction of the existence of a God, and we have evidence that points against the existence of a God. And then, so when you have very strong evidence that points to two opposite conclusions, you should sort of think to yourself, you don't know what's going on there, and withhold judgment about where the total evidence is pointing to. Now I'm not so sure about that way of thinking because of the simulation hypothesis. I tend to think that, as I was just saying a second ago, that there's all the kind of good evidence for the existence of a God can be re-explained in terms of the simulation hypothesis, and so that there isn't much that's left in terms of the kind of evidence that we have. Um, um, in terms of there being some kind of supernatural creator. So let's see. Isn't one positive for God over a simulator that God is posited to be eternal and the ground of all being, whereas a simulator pushes the problem back one level in respect of the cosmological argument? Yeah, I mean that's something that gets said a lot. I don't really think that's true. So this is something, if you read the Chalmers work on this, he talks about the difference between a cosmic God with a capital G, who's a God, a creator of all reality, um, and a kind of lowercase God who's simply the creator of the simulation and therefore the creator of maybe the world that we live in. But I think that when it comes specifically to the cosmological argument, what we have is, well, first of all, I don't really think the cosmological argument is a very good argument for the existence of a creator. So that's the first thing I would say is I would defend a beginningless universe, a sort of eternal into the past. I think that's an open possibility. But even if you take the cosmological argument very seriously, what it suggests is that the world that we live in has a cause, that something created it, which isn't part of the world itself, which is outside of our space and time. So that could be a timeless, eternal ground of all being, but it's not clear that we need to invoke that. That's where the simulation hypothesis comes in, because the cosmological argument, if what you're doing is saying our world here has these various features to it, and therefore there should be some cause of it, then the simulation hypothesis is a better fit with that argument. On the other hand, if what you're saying is, well, just all being itself, even maybe outside the simulation, then I tend to say we don't really know what the non-simulated world would be like. We don't really know. And if the non-simulated world is like this world, then those people also have reason to believe that they're in a simulation. So that uh, you need a lot of extra assumptions to think that we need some cause or ground for all of reality itself, as opposed to just our reality, which is what the cosmological argument is typically aimed at. So I don't really think that it does get pushed back one level in that sense, since what we're worried about is how did our reality come about? And the simulation hypothesis explains that. And then speculating about what the next level up outside of our simulated reality, if we're in one, might be like. I don't think we have really any good reason for thinking that that world would need have the same properties as this one, therefore give us the same sort of reasons to think that it has a cause. So yeah, I don't really buy that line of reasoning. Let's see, R10, mental representation in regards to sense perception, stable hallucination, simulation, phenomenal world. are all these more or less synonyms in your view? Um, I wouldn't say so. Um, Mental representations can come in conscious and unconscious varieties. Having a belief is a form of mental representation, but it's not sense perception. But if you just think of mental representation in terms of just like, okay, here's sense perception, then I don't really, it's not 100% clear that every sense perception is representational. There may be non-representational sensory components. So I don't think that it's automatically given to us that mental representations, sense perceptions are mental representation. You have to argue for that. A stable hallucination. I don't. So I know that people like Anil Seth and those guys have this kind of view that sensory perception is a kind of externally governed hallucination. I think that's an interesting view. I don't think it's forced on us. In fact, one of the guys that I want to talk to on Consciousness Live is a kind of direct realist in terms of perception. Sometimes people call views like that naive realism. Sometimes they call it relationalism. So relationalism is the view that the external world is a important component in our sensory experience, so that when I'm looking at the computer screen or at a tree or whatever, then that tree or computer screen is itself something that I'm related to, and my phenomenal experience is comprised of that relation to the properties of the external object. So, I mean, in my youth, I was a kind of a naive realist. I think everyone kind of starts off their life and as a naive realist. You have to do a lot of work to push people back into the view that phenomenal consciousness is the phenomenal properties that we're acquainted with or that we experience are in the mind and not in the external world. They certainly don't seem to be in the mind, in my opinion. So, yeah. Simulation is once again one of these terms. There are simulations, I think of things that are not perceptual and not phenomenal. Phenomenal world, the phenomenal world, once again, I think there's a debate about whether it's internal or external. So they aren't synonyms in the sense of having the same meaning. Whether it turns out that these all kind of pick out the same phenomena in some sense or other, I think that is a open question. But maybe I'm misunderstanding what the point of your question is over here. Not sure if I'm missing your point. But yeah. So my own view is that there are probably non-representational components of the mind. But with respect to consciousness, maybe it's all representations. I mean, I defend what the horror view, I call it, the higher order representation of representationalism. So it's not because I think representationalism is true. It's just because I think higher order theories are a kind of representational theory of consciousness, and a lot of people are confused about them. So I spend a lot of time trying to clarify what's going on there and laying out the landscape, because I think that progress in philosophy is partially comprised of clarifying views and relations between views and arguments. So that's not to say that I agree with it. In fact, when I was a master's student, I was trying to write my master's thesis against representationalism. I was, more in the Ned Block camp in terms of thinking of consciousness as a sensory, non-representational, or at least, in those terms. So anyway, yeah, I don't think that they're synonyms, but I do think that maybe there is an open possibility that phenomenal consciousness is a matter of representations. I think it's an open possibility that it isn't. I think that we really don't know. And this is one of those things that that I think is very important when it comes to thinking about consciousness, because a lot of people tend to think that people like Philip actually tend to think that the properties of fundamental consciousness are directly revealed to us in introspection, but it's clearly not true in the sense that it's not revealed to you in introspection whether or not phenomenal consciousness is a matter of representations, whether it's a matter of relation to something external to you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's an open question. Hello, Victor. Let's see. Do I agree with the egocentric predicament in regards to the metaphysics of perception / epistemology? I'm not really sure what the egocentric predicament is. What does that mean? Egocentric. I mean, I guess I could guess what it means, that it we only have our own experience to start with, or something like that. Is that what it is? What did you mean by that? By the way, if anyone wants to come and chat with me in person, I have the Zoom link right here. You could come into the Zoom call, and I'd be happy to chat with you. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, maybe you could say a little bit more about what you mean by the egocentric predicament. What are my thoughts on radical enactivism? I mean, I've thought about it. I've talked to some people who have that kind of view. I never really 100% understand what they think is so important about it. So it's, interesting. I guess it's a kind of hardcore anti-representationalism, as it's sometimes presented. But yeah, I mean, I guess I don't think that there's any real reason to take it seriously if what it means. So maybe maybe I'm reading it in a slightly different way than you are, Victor. So if so, let me know. But the way I understand radical enactivism is roughly as the view that the body and the world play an important role in consciousness, and that you can't just focus on the brain. So that if we wanted to understand what consciousness was, we'd have to look at certain kinds of actions and our relation to the world and the way that we interact with it. So, I am a little bit skeptical that in order to understand consciousness, we need to take that point of view. I think that, yeah, people with locked-in syndrome and the so-called super Spartan, if you remember these thought experiments from way back in the old days. Super Spartans are people who have conscious experience but never move, don't show it in any way, don't act in any way. So if that's even coherent, does it challenge the idea of enactivism? I don't know. So yeah, I guess when I've spoken with enactivists, I've never really fully understood why they take the view so seriously, and I don't think that it dissolves the hard problem of consciousness in the way that maybe they do think it sometimes. Like, for an example, what's his name? I'm forgetting. He wrote the book Why Red Doesn't Sound Like a Bell. Why am I blanking? Having a senior moment. I was just literally, okay, holy moly. Wow. Let me look it up. What is the Kevin O'Regan. God, my brain, dude. Okay. Oh, yes. So I think that people like O'Regan really think that, yeah, it's just if you understand why we behave in certain ways or act in certain ways to the objects around us, then that's it. That dissolves the hard problem. I'm not really sure that it does. But I think it's interesting. Why? What are your thoughts on it, Victor? Let's see. Arden. Meaning that we are stuck in the phenomenal world in the Kantian sense. Yeah. So I don't, I don't, I so I don't think that that's something that we know. I think it's an interesting view, um, but I don't think it's foisted on you. This is something I think idealists like to think we have to accept. I think that really the only argument for idealism comes from this way of thinking. That all we have is the so-called screen of perception. That's the way um, that people like Bernardo like to phrase it. I don't think that's necessarily the case because of things about naive realism and things that we were just talking about before. So, um, but I am, interested in Kantian sorts of views, and I think a lot about Kant and Kantian types of views, and it is very interesting. One thing that's kind of been revealed, I would say, in the discussions about perception in the last 28 years or so, is that you could be a representationalist and also a direct realist. So, direct realism is the idea that we have direct contact with the objects in the external world, in perception. And in the old days, that was thought to be kind of married to a view like naive realism, that it's the objects out there having these properties which are revealed to us in our sensory experience. But I think that more recently, people have started to realize that you could be a direct realist, thinking that in perception we have direct contact with the external world, and still we represent the external world via states of the mind. So therein would be such a view where we weren't trapped in the phenomenal world in that sense, because we're interacting with the external um, with the external objects, and we could say things about them. Unlike in the Kantian view, which the noumenal world is that which, with any attempt to say anything about it at all is just going to end up embroiling you in contradictions. Um, so, uh, so yeah, I do think that uh, this kind of view is interesting, but I don't think it's forced on us by anything that we know about perception or anything of that nature. Um, this is why when I actually talked with Bernardo, I asked him if he thought maybe idealism was supported by an outdated kind of theory of perception, one that we don't really have reason to take anymore. Because this old idea that all we have is the experience, and then the world we're screened off it from it, sort of this what's sometimes called the veil of perception, that in between us and the external world is just like painting. Um, so, okay, that's one view, but it's not clear that we are forced to take that view. On the other hand, I do think that, when it comes to talking about simulations and stuff like that, Kantian views are very interesting, and that the simulation hypothesis is compatible with a kind of Kantianism. So, yeah. Um, that would be my view. It's not clear that we have to take that view, and certainly it doesn't seem that way. Obviously, from the inside, so to speak, it certainly seems like I'm in the world. But of course, that could happen even if all we were trapped inside the phenomenal world. So I could see why someone might think that. But even if we were trapped in the phenomenal world, um, I, in the sense that our experiences are somehow um, representational, then I don't think that it entails idealism. Although I'm not super against idealism, I think idealism is interesting. I just don't think that it's forced on us by a theory of perception, and I don't think it's forced on us by science, and I don't think that it's forced on us by the hard problem of consciousness. In other words, I don't think it's forced on us. I don't think there's any conclusive reason to believe in idealism. I'm not sure even if that's why you're asking this, by the way. I'm just pointing out that I think that a lot of idealists do take this. All right, so let's see. Victor says sometimes radical inactivism looks like behaviorism. Yeah, Burge calls them action imperialists. Yeah, action imperialists. That's funny. So I could see why someone would say that, why it looks a bit like behaviorism, saying that, all that it is the way we interact with the world. But at the same time, I think that a lot of the inactivists are that it's not exactly behaviorism, but I can see why you say it looks a lot like it. But behaviorism obviously is the view that mental terms are sort of defined in terms of behavior, or the more radical view that you could explain all mental terms by only talking about behavior, and you don't need to have anything left over with respect to what it's like, or mental terms, this sort of inner residue, as they sometimes put it back in the old days. So I'm not sure the inactivists take that view, although I could see why, yeah, when you're really focused that much on behavior and interactions with the world, it does tend to look that way. I mean, as you guys probably know, if you've ever met me before, my view is really the thing I'm committed to the most is that phenomenal consciousness is real, and everything else is difficult. So, I mean, I'm 100% against illusionism as it's usually presented, even more so than people like David Chalmers. When I had him on Consciousness Live, he said he allowed a small possibility that illusionism was right, and I was like, I can't even go that far, man. Not unless it's a kind of weak illusionism. But the idea that consciousness doesn't exist is just too radical for me to even really take seriously. That it doesn't exist in the way we think that it does is less radical. Something I think maybe is interesting, but yeah. So. And then the other thing I'm most committed to is the idea that physicalism hasn't been refuted, and that's, we don't have any real strong reason to prefer any other kinds of views. Okay, so let's see. Krupp says, struggling with the problem of intentionality within cognitive philosophy. Do you know of any sources to go to for this? Yeah, what do you mean, like introductory sources? Or like primary sources. So I think if like classical places to go to, I would say Fodor. Like if you want first for primary sources on this, Jerry Fodor is the place that you would want to start when talking about intentionality. But like, what aspect of intentionality were you interested in? So are you just talking about like, what is it? What are we trying to talk about here? Or do you mean like philosophical accounts of it? The difference between um, like causal theories, historical theories, teleosemantics, and that sort of stuff. Yes, say more about what it is that you're looking for. My general advice for secondary sources is Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is really the best place to start. But I'll come back and see what you say about that later. Okay. So can I talk more about why you think physicalism is the more scientific metaphysical option? I don't quite understand from your Blue Sky exchange on this. Yeah, of course. So when I say that it's the scientific option, I mean it's the one that fits with science. We don't have any reason to go beyond what science has shown us. Science postulates the existence at the fundamental level of certain kinds of entities, energy, quarks, electrons, and laws that govern the way that they behave. Psychology, biology, and so forth and so on don't posit anything more than that. So if you just were looking at what science tells you, and you wanted to know what metaphysical picture fits best with that, then in some sense you could make any metaphysical picture fit with what we know from science. but the one that is the most scientific in the sense of not going beyond what science suggests is physicalism. Physicalism is the view, as I would put it, that consciousness is just like anything else around here. So um, we don't feel the need to posit extra entities to explain water or electricity or lightning. And so if you saw everything that we know about H2O and then said, yeah, but water's not identical with H2O, they're just correlated. Water and H2O, they're correlated with each other. I think that I'm a water panpsychist, and there's fundamental like watery stuff at the base that is somehow composing or comprising the fundamental entities of physics. Then you would be going beyond what science tells us. Science gives us a perfectly reasonable explanation of how water is H2O, and we don't need to add anything to it. And I take the same view seriously about consciousness, that it's simply um, just like everything else around here. So, in that sense, physicalism is the scientific option, not by being entailed by science, but by just being the one that takes science seriously and doesn't go beyond it. So, without positing anything that exists outside of the realm of the scientific world. So, in that sense, and in that sense only, was I saying that it's the metaphysical option that's the scientific option. So, I think that some people think that it certainly seems like on that exchange, people were taking me to say that it's entailed by science or something like that. I think that is a possibility, by the way. So that it could be the case that in the limit, what we know about science entails that consciousness exists logically. I take that view very seriously, and I don't think we have reason to deny it. So it could be the case that it's entailed by it. But I wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying that science entails that physicalism is true. I was just saying that it's the view that doesn't go beyond science. So therefore, it's more scientific. It's the view that respects science. It takes it seriously. Whereas all the other views fundamentally deny that science can do the job, and therefore are anti-scientific. In particular, people who take this sort of view have an inflated sense of themselves, thinking themselves very special. Like, it's got to make sense to me, or else it can't be true. I think that's kind of laughably false. See, I just laughed. And on the other hand, people think we know enough already about consciousness and science to know that you can't get one from the other. I just think both of those are not true. So I don't know if that helps clarify anything or not, but anyway. So illusionism versus panpsychism. Oh, I'd be a panpsychist before illusionist any day. Any day. Any day. Any view that takes phenomenal consciousness seriously is by default by default more plausible than illusionism, in my view, just by default. So, I mean, if strong illusionism, if you really want to take the view that phenomenal consciousness does not exist, like you really want to say that, like seriously, then any view that takes phenomenal consciousness seriously is more plausible than that. Usually, illusionists say that and then back away from it, and they do this dance, back and forth, where they say phenomenal consciousness doesn't exist, but consciousness does. It's like, okay, so that's what we mean by consciousness, is simply phenomenal consciousness, what it's like, the experience. Those things have to exist, or else it's not consistent with reality, in my view. So I would that's what I would say, is panpsychism is much more plausible than illusionism. Unless you have a weak version of illusionism, which just says, look, which already we have, it's called type B physicalism, which is the view that, phenomenal consciousness is real and identical to some physical property. If it were that versus panpsychism, then I think that's more plausible. Um, I really just don't think we have any good reason to think that consciousness isn't physical. So it may not be physical, but no one's given any good reason for it, in my opinion. And the reasons that are given, conceivability arguments, for example, are just, you know, question begging. And that's what I mean. I've spent a lot of time arguing this, but I just think that I can conceive of consciousness as being physical in just the same way that they claim to conceive of it as not being physical. So they conceive of zombies. I conceive of what I call shambis. Shambis are creatures that are physical and conscious, like me, with phenomenal consciousness. So I just don't. If it's going to come down to fist table bumping over who's really conceiving what, then I just don't think that's very interesting. If you could show that there's some contradiction derivable from the assumption that consciousness is physical, then that would be great. But no one has been able to do that. So I don't think it's forthcoming. No one's been able to do it with respect to zombies either, although I've tried and I sort of have. The best attempt I think I did at this was talking about quantum mechanics. And so if your view is that consciousness plays an important role in collapsing the wave function, for example, then when you're conceiving of zombies and there's no consciousness there, then there's going to be no collapsing of the wave function. That seems like a contradiction. And that you stipulated that there was, and that it's entailed that there isn't. And then Chalmers responded to me by saying, oh, but in that world, there could just be kind of spontaneous collapse, laws of physics that are have gaps. And at that point, I don't really know what we're doing anymore. Is that a world that's physically like ours? I don't know. The laws seem very different. So anyway, but he seemed to suggest that the laws could be exactly the same, and then there'd just be these like spontaneous things that happen without any laws that determine them happening. And that seems very strange to me. So I think the jury's still out. But anyway, so the point is that all of the people who think that we need something more than the physical are people who can't understand how consciousness could be physical. To which my response is, but why do you need to understand it? Like, the same is true for quantum mechanics and all sorts of things that seem to be suggested by science that we don't understand how it could be the case. But so reality may just not care about whether you can understand it. That's not a criteria for things being true. So anyway, I would just kind of say that I don't really think that it's fine for people to believe this stuff. I'm not saying you assess the evidence yourself. But when you go around saying things like, it's obviously false that consciousness is physical because conceivability, blah, 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 making sense to me, then I just think, no, that's wrong. It's fine for you to say, to me, it seems that way, in which case you're just making a claim about yourself, not about reality. And that's fine. People, there are flat earthers out there. That's great. It can seem any way you want, but it's a different question about like what objectively is the case. So I think that I forget what I was even talking about, why I started talking about it. Anyway, so am I more sympathetic with reductive or materialist? Am I more sympathetic with the reductive or materialist, non-reductive explainability of consciousness? Well, it depends on what you mean by reduction. And yes, Stephen, this is an office hour session. You feel free to. I have the Zoom link. You could jump into and talk to me, or you could just type stuff into the chat. I originally just started off checking to see whether I can work OBS and getting ready for Consciousness Live, which is starting on Wednesday. But yes, I'm happy. I have about another 45 minutes or so, which I'm happy to hang out and talk to people. So yes, I'm much more sympathetic to reductive explanations of consciousness. Non-reductive explanations, I don't really understand what they're talking about. So, but again, it depends on what you mean by reduction. So if you mean by reduction like an a priori deducibility, then I'm pretty sympathetic to that, actually. I'm pretty sympathetic to the possibility that there is an a priori entailment from consciousness from the physical stuff with the laws to the existence of consciousness. I don't. Anyway, so I'm pretty sympathetic to that. I defend it. On the other hand, I'm also sympathetic to the view that you can't do that, but that you could get what Ned Block calls a causal reduction. A causal reduction is the idea that you can identify consciousness with something physical, but not explain why it is that way. So I think a lot depends on your background in philosophy of science, and I am, friendly to the idea that identities aren't deduced, that they are postulated to explain other things. And if we wanted to explain why pain has the kind of effects that it does, that one plausible hypothesis is to identify it with some physical state of the brain, and then that state having its effects is pain having its effects. So I think that that's one way things could go, in which case you don't get like an a priori entailment from one to the other, but you still get a reduction of one to the other in the ontological sense. There's nothing more than the brain hanging around there. Now, if so, is that non-reductive? I don't know. It is in one sense and isn't in the other sense. On the other hand, if you mean by non-reductive that there is some distinctly like some property which is distinct from the physical property, and then that's what consciousness is, and maybe one supervenes on the other, or like, I don't know. So those views just seem like dualism to me, and I'm not very sympathetic to them because I don't really understand like what it is that they're trying to say in the sense of being physical. All right, so I don't know. You can feel free to follow up on that. Let's see. Someone's trying to come into the Zoom chat, so I'll let them in just a second. But Krupp says they were asking about intentionality, what it is. It seems to be quite broad, so it's quite difficult to get a handle on. Just the aboutness of mental states. I think that there's a tendency nowadays to just think of them as representations. So we want to be able to explain why a particular physical state is about, when I'm thinking about the Empire State Building, why is my thought about that object? It seems like it is about that object, not about Taipei 101 or some other tall building. So what is it about my mental state that makes it depend on the actual Empire State Building in order for it to be true? In which case, so I would recommend Ruth Millikan's work. I'm very fond of her sort of work, and so forth and so on. But I can get you some primer. I'll get you some sources second. But let me take let's see what's going on over here. And what is this? Albion. Hello. Albion, are you there?
I am here.
Oh, I don't have my headphones in. Yeah, I got you now. Go ahead. What's up?
Not much. A bit sick, actually. Woke up with a sore throat, so not feeling at the top of my game. But otherwise, doing pretty well.
Okay, sorry about that. That's been going around, actually. I've been seeing a lot of people with sore throats. Can you still hear me? Uh-oh. I think Whoa, that sounds weird. Maybe that wasn't a great idea. Putting in my headphones, I mean. Hello, are you still there? You're trying to say something. Here, I'll see if that helps. All right. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, all right. So I got to do it without the headphones. Okay, so what did you want to talk about?
I don't know, actually. Maybe you can just explain who you are. I actually don't know that much about you. My friend sent me an invite. He knows I'm interested in philosophy, and we're studying cognitive science together. So I actually have no preconceived notions, nothing. I don't know who you are, and you don't know who I am. So Where do
Cool.
we go from here?
I don't know. You showed up in my stream, so I don't.
True, true, true. Well, I was not expecting talking immediately. I was just gonna observe for a while and then maybe chime in with some questions.
Okay. Well, I was just about to answer InfoVoi's question about AI and consciousness. So he asked me,
Okay.
could AI be conscious, and if so, um, could they become conscious, and if so, what's the most likely route to that outcome? Is
Mm,
consciousness needed for AGI? I mean, so I'm kind of in the consciousness is probably a biological phenomenon camp.
mm,
Um, I tend to think that you need biology, um, and that AI doesn't have biology, therefore won't be conscious. Um, I don't think I know that that view is true, but I am sort of in the camp of finding it plausible that that's true. So if that were the case, then AI couldn't be conscious, because without the relevant biology. I mean, obviously, I'm conscious, and the brain is in some sense a machine, a biological machine. So the question, it's got functions, and there's a way of describing it computationally. But the question, of course, is whether it's in virtue of the computational properties that the brain realizes that is conscious, that consciousness arises. And I don't really think that we know what the answer to that question is. Um, Probably it's just a prejudice on my part. It's probably my last known prejudice that consciousness is biological. And I used to be like strongly against functionalism and strongly
okay.
against any kind of computational view. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of become more, like who the fuck knows? Like it's possible that that consciousness is a functional property. So I've kind of given up on that. But I don't think we know it, and I don't think
No,
it's easy to dismiss the idea that consciousness is biological.
no, I kind of agree. I think my intuition inclines me towards your view as well, that it's based on biology somehow. I don't know if it's, I don't know, I don't even know how to really put it, but like your cells are working together. They have their own theology. Same with like everything in my body. They have a goal and they work together. And there might be something in there that we don't know yet that together creates the consciousness. And that my consciousness might just be all of these small things working together. Because I try to tend to think in like the smallest truths I can, like how do you say it in English, like physicists, they think in, yeah, I don't know, I try to like go from what I know, or so I can come up with something, but it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard. Consciousness is it's weird. But if I go into what you said and try to open it up a bit, so if we assume that we need a biological framework for consciousness to exist, then shouldn't in the like foreseeable future we be able to create that, like create maybe silicon based, or I don't know, just some other material where we create like the xenobots that Michael Levin is doing, just upscaled to a humanoid. It doesn't have to be humanoid, just upscaled, I guess,
Yeah.
because then theoretically consciousness should be able to arise if you want to go with that route, or hold, store, I don't know.
Well, so I mean, if consciousness requires biology, then those things won't be conscious.
How
And I
come?
don't think that. So as Infovoy also asked, is consciousness required for AGI? I don't. It, I don't think so. So in one sense, I would say so. In another sense, I wouldn't. So intelligence is a vexed term, but as I understand it, it's
Yeah.
just the ability to solve problems.
Mhm.
So if you can solve a problem, then to that extent you're intelligent. And to have general intelligence means to have the ability to solve many different kinds of problems in many different domains.
Mhm.
So, for example, chess playing computers are not AGI because they can only solve chess problems, and
Yeah.
self-driving cars are not AGI because they can only solve navigation problems, but they can't solve chess problems, and vice versa. But I can do both, imperfectly, but I still can do it. And for a large range of problems, I can solve them if you put them in front of me, figure out ways to achieve a goal given some constraints. So I think that we have already intelligence without consciousness. I don't think self-driving cars or Roomba, who's my other favorite example, are conscious
No, I agree.
in the sense of phenomenal consciousness. I think
Exactly.
they are conscious in the sense of a more generic sense of aware of the environment, and maybe even in a sense of uh, having what's called creature consciousness, the ability to
Yeah.
respond intelligently to the environment. But I don't think that comes with experience itself. So, so I think you could, in principle, have intelligence without consciousness. But could you have an intelligence like mine without consciousness? I would say no, because I think that thoughts, beliefs, desires, and those sorts of things come with a phenomenal aspect. That there's something that it's like to think a thought. There's something that
Exactly.
it's like to have a desire. So that
Yeah.
those are kinds of phenomenal consciousness. And you couldn't build something like me without having consciousness. So you could build something that does a lot of the stuff that I do, and maybe even generally does the stuff that I do. But it would require consciousness. However,
But where would this consciousness be then? Because if it's not, because my point is, if we hypothetically we have the technology to be able to build these biological based machines, then shouldn't they also hypothetically be able to have consciousness? Even
yeah, if
though I
they're
agree that
biologically based, yes.
consciousness and awareness, they don't have to be the same thing necessarily, and consciousness and intelligence definitely does not have to. They don't like require each other. They can be standalone.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly. No, I agree with you. So yeah, it depends. So you need the right kind of biology if it's a biological thing, and it depends on what that turns out to be. But I think that the kind of biggest reason for thinking that biology is important is, well, first of all, that's the only thing we've ever found that has conscious experience.
yeah, we base it on what we know, and that's all we
Exactly.
know.
And secondly, the way the brain works is very surprising to anyone who was, if you didn't know any better and you just looked at the brain, and you say, wait, why is there this electrical system coupled with this chemical system? Why are there synapses, chemical synapses? It seems sort of surprising. And if you look at the history of this stuff, people were indeed surprised by the discovery of the synapse, which happened in the 20s. And it wasn't
Mm,
until the 1970s or so that people really started to accept that you have this electrical system and this chemical system combined. And it does
mhm.
seem weird. Why would there be this two-factor process unless it were important? It doesn't seem like it would show up accidentally or without a reason. So
Yeah.
that seems to me it's kind of suggested that something's important about the this chemical electrical process. So yeah, if you scaled that up, uh, then that I think you're right. As long as it's a biological sort of machine, um, then you could probably have the prospects. But we'd have to recreate the right aspects of the biology, which we don't really know.
Yeah, we're not there yet,
Yeah,
if we ever will.
but of course, I'm open to being wrong about that. So could
Um,
AGI be conscious? I know people who think that the answer is more firmly yes. So like people like David
yeah,
Chalmers and
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
More of the integrated theories,
yeah, and I'm open
alternative
to those
information
ideas.
theories. Yeah, I'm the same. I don't necessarily think that what I think is right. I'm open to many possible avenues, and it's also kind of hard since even the words that we're using are not. We usually don't tend to think of the words in the same way, like consciousness, awareness. We tend to imply almost the same thing, but a small difference can make a big difference in what it means and how we communicate around these topics.
Yeah,
Um,
very good. Let's see. Someone else asks, "What are your thoughts on special intrinsic relationship views like acquaintance that people like Chalmers sometimes suggest? How should we be thinking about acquaintance?" Um, I mean, for my own view, I like acquaintance um, because it certainly feels like I'm acquainted with my consciousness where acquaintance is a kind of direct, non-causal kind of knowing. But I also think that you could explain that with certain sort of representational states. So
hmm,
I think that if you had a representation of yourself as being acquainted with something, then the representation would make it seem to you as though you were acquainted, and therefore you could explain the phenomenology of acquaintance without there actually being any acquaintance. So I don't think that you can just say, well, it seems to me like I have acquaintance, therefore there is. That seems to me to be too quick. So while I definitely have the phenomenology, I feel like when I have an experience, like I get migraines, for example. When I have a migraine, it sure as hell seems like that's all that there is this pain, like an ice pick right here, and it feels very like directly in front of me, like it's right there. There's no space between me and it. And the same is true of all my conscious experiences. It feels like I could focus on them and say, okay, here's the redness of this thing, and it's something that's right there in front of me. But whether so some people take that to indicate like, oh, it's hard to explain in physicalistic terms. And I would say, well, that's not necessarily the case. So I think that you have to be careful when it comes to acquaintance. And you can't just say, well, I'm directly acquainted with my experience and it doesn't seem physical, therefore it isn't physical. I'm very suspicious of that kind of move, which I feel like a lot of, like, for example, certain panpsychists make that kind of move. So how I think of acquaintance is as a kind of representational content. We represent ourselves as being acquainted, and thus that's the way it appears. But yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
I don't know. I'm not well versed in that, so I don't think I have a stance or anything to say. But I was thinking about like the evolution of consciousness. If you think that it serves like a purely practical purpose, or maybe you think that it's like a byproduct of other evolutionary processes. Well, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I tend to sort of be very sympathetic to the identity theory, which
Okay.
claims that consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, just is identical to some process in the brain, in which
Mm,
case, then it has a very big evolutionary function.
yeah.
And I think this explains like worries about psychophysical harmony, which
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but why does pain match up with the experience match up with the rational justification that we have? So I think that, if evolution, evolution selects for behaviors and physical structures. And if consciousness is identical to one of those physical structures, then evolution selects for consciousness as well. And being conscious in that sense would have a very practical um, uh, uh, impact. However,
Yeah.
so I tend to be sympathetic to that view. However,
Okay.
I'm also understand that it's not 100% clear whether consciousness is identical to the brain or whether there is any practical value to being conscious. So there are, in a phenomenal sense. So there are some people who think that there isn't a function associated with phenomenal consciousness. And those views, I don't really, have a lot of sympathy for them, but I understand why someone might. So if you thought that you could have unconscious states, like for example, unconscious pains and unconscious beliefs and desires and sensations of red. And if you thought um, the causal power of those states was due to their whatever was going on at the unconscious level, then their
Yeah.
being conscious is not going to add much to the
No.
discussion. So I think a lot of this discussion really depends on how you think about those things. Yeah. I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
was getting distracted by reading something that was coming
No,
up
it's
in the
okay.
chat.
It's okay. But how would you define consciousness in your work? And do you think it's fundamentally tied to the brain, or could it exist independently in some form? I'm
Yeah.
interested.
I mean, by consciousness, what I mean is the subjective experience or what it's like from your point of view. So I think that's the primary sense of consciousness that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Distinguish that from other senses. Um, I think that what we want from science is an explanation of phenomenal consciousness. We want to understand how it relates to the world that we live in, and we don't want to explain it away or debunk it. We want to give an account of it.
Mm,
So I do think that it's fundamentally tied to the brain, either by being identical to something going on in the brain, or by being some kind of other representational state, maybe that's instantiated by the brain. So
okay.
I mean, I'm open to certain forms of non-physicalism. Like I'm sort of friendly to panpsychism.
Okay.
I'm not super friendly to it, but I'm sort of friendly to it. If I were going to be a dualist, I'd be a quantum dualist. someone who
Okay, can you
thinks
explain
that.
that?
Say again.
Can you explain quantum dualism?
Yeah. So quantum dualism is roughly the idea that consciousness might play some role in collapsing the wave function.
Okay, like
So,
or chore. The
well, yeah. So or is not exactly. So as I understand it, or isn't really a quantum theory of consciousness because what it says basically is that well, you have consciousness everywhere already, and then what happens is that there's some property associated with gravity which causes the
Hmm,
wave function to collapse, and then you get consciousness like ours. So when
okay,
it's orchestrated by the brain, but every time
yeah,
there's a collapse of the wave function, then there's consciousness, according to how I understand Penrose's view. But it's not
yeah.
that consciousness itself collapses the wave function.
No,
It's
exactly.
that
It's like a
there's some
byproduct. Yeah.
independent, feature of gravity which causes that, and then that's what consciousness is the collapse. It doesn't
Hmm.
cause the collapse though. So not exactly or. Um, and yeah, so I guess that's another view I'm sort of suspicious of is this whole microtubules thing doesn't seem to me to be
Hmm. Yeah, I'm
useful.
intrigued. I want to see how that develops, even though I'm not fully on board on the premises. I just, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So the kind of quantum dualism that I had in mind was more like that consciousness may resist superposition. So it might be the only thing that doesn't get superimposed.
Imposed. Yeah.
And so that as soon as there is a kind of tendency towards a superposition in with respect to consciousness, that consciousness resists it, and then you get a collapse into a definite state. In that case,
Wow.
consciousness would sort of be outside of the physical system. It would be a real
Yeah.
kind of like substance dualism almost.
Yeah,
Um,
that's interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
I haven't
So
heard of that.
Chalmers has defended some of this. He's got written a paper with this guy Kelvin McQueen. If you're interested, you could look into that. And then some other
Kelvin.
people too, like Miguel Sebastian is another philosopher who's defended a view similar to this. So anyway, if I were going to be a dualist, I'd probably be some sort version of quantum dualist. But my most bedrock view in philosophy is that we don't have any good reason to reject physicalism. That's my kind
Okay.
of default view is that physicalism is probably the most plausible view overall. And that certainly we shouldn't abandon it because of conceivability arguments or
Okay.
things of that nature.
But then how do you approach like altered states of mind, psychedelics? Personally, just a lack of sleep makes me trip balls. No, actually, it totally does.
I've had some
And
of the most profound hallucinations of my life by taking a sleeping medication and not going to
okay,
sleep.
yeah, no, that shit will mess you up, man.
Yeah, exactly.
But also like, because I'm very interested in dreams, not just like hypothetically, theoretically, like Jungian type stuff, but also like the personal interaction that you can have with your dreams and your conscious, subconscious, whatever, how do you want to define it. But I remember when I was like 14, 15, I was getting into like philosophy and neuroscience and what is everything. I had my first psychedelic experience and it opened up so many questions for so many things. And then I started to get into like dreams even more.
Mm.
But I have a hard time explaining how I can have dreams that feel so vivid and lucid without any input from the outside, since it's all just in my brain. If that's how you want to put it, it's all. Let's take the brain out. It's just an experience that I'm having. How can you reconcile that and with physicalism? Because to me, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand why it's hard to reconcile that with physicalism, since dreams are very, I have very realistic dreams. I'm not a
Yeah.
strong imager, mental imagery. I kind of am phantasic in that respect. I can't like picture an apple in my mind. But when it comes to
Okay.
dreams, I have very vivid dreams. I've even had lucid dreams a couple times. I definitely have
Okay.
done hallucinogenics when I was younger, not in many, many years, but, you know, definitely have had experiences with those things. And some people I knew took like, tripping on mushrooms or LSD or whatever to be and a reason to go against physical. I never really like the first time I took mushrooms. I thought to myself, "Gee, my brain is amazing. Look what's going on here."
Yeah.
So it never really seemed to me to push against physicalism. if experiences are just a matter of brain processes and you mess with the brain processes, then you're going to mess with the experience.
Yeah.
And so I just never really found that to be like I've had very mystical kinds of experiences, like ego dissolution,
Mm,
feeling, like there was no difference between me and the external world, and
yeah.
that I wasn't a thing that existed. So I've had all those kinds of experiences, and I just don't think that there's any reason to think that in order to explain those experiences, you need to go beyond what the brain is doing, since we
Okay.
know that the brain is, in some sense, um, generating our ordinary subjective experience. And in the ordinary case, like the more you study neuroscience, the more you realize that ordinary perception and experience is something that's generated by the brain itself. Um, so that it's not so surprising to find out that it can also generate these other kinds of things. And I think that experiences of ego dissolution or those sort of things can be explained representationally. So if you have a
Mm,
representation of yourself as not being a self, then that's what you'll experience. The
okay.
same I sort of think with respect to dreams. Like I've had lucid dreams, and I don't really find that again there would be anything which counters. I mean, so if we stimulate the temporal parietal junction, for example, then people have out of body experiences, and they have a
Mm,
sense of like looking down on their own body. And I've had dream experiences like that as well, by the way, where I
okay.
felt like I could see myself walking and I was a disembodied point of view. So I don't
Mm,
know. It sort of seems like just more stuff that the brain is doing. Now, I'm not saying that it proves it or that that's it refutes the other views. I'm just saying I don't really see the pressure
no, I get
pushing
it.
us away from thinking that the brain is doing this.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that would be my sort of take on those things. I'm
Okay.
very interested in those sorts of things, but I don't really see them as ruling out physicalism. Um,
Okay. I don't like I can see how they both can fit in the picture. The way you described it, it's just another function of the brain. Like you said, if I mess with my brain, it's gonna mess with how I perceive stuff.
yeah,
Um, I don't know. It's just yeah. It feels like my intuition is saying that like there's something there. That doesn't mean that I know what it is or that it disputes or refutes or anything. It's just that there is something there. Because I have lucid dreams every night basically. I had a lucid dream before I woke up, and I had a lucid dream before like yesterday. But let's stay almost on the same topic, but a bit segue to like the personal experience of time.
mhm.
So from a like neuroscientific perspective, how do you think our sense of time arises? Could experiencing like experiences of like escaping time through psychedelics or meditation, which I have both done and like experienced how time, I don't know, it's hard to put into words. I'm there, but I'm not there. So time passes, but I don't feel the time passing
Yeah.
until when I come back. Do you think this could tell us something profound about the brain or reality?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not a super up to date on this kind of stuff. So philosophy of time
Okay.
is not my main area.
Okay.
And you're not even talking about like the nature of time. You're talking about the experience of time, which is of course something
Mm,
different. But as far as I understand it, this stuff is largely a large part of it is generated by the cerebellum,
yeah.
which is sort of gives us like a sense of time flying or dragging on. So if you're sitting in a classroom and like this is taking forever, versus if you're like, whoa, 2 hours went by already. So we do have this kind of common sense experience of the time passing seemingly at different rates. It doesn't really pass at different rates, obviously, an hour objectively, but it can seem like it takes longer or shorter depending
Yeah.
on in your experiential arena. And we sort of know that there are areas of the brain which seem to contribute to this process, determining judgments about how long something takes, whether it's whether an hour really has passed or not. And I've always
Mm,
been kind of really good at that. Like I can kind of tell like when an hour has passed
yeah.
intuitively for the most part. And I've
I'm the
always been very
same.
good like at waking up at certain times without alarm clocks and stuff like that.
Okay. That's a
So I
superpower.
have a kind of good subjective sense of time. Plus, I'm a drummer. So ha ha
Ah,
ha.
yeah.
Joke.
Okay. Interesting. That might
That was
tie
a
into
joke. That
it.
was a joke. I'm a bad drummer. I'm not a good drummer. But
Okay.
anyway, I do drum. I was making a time joke. But anyway, so I do
Okay.
think that we sort of have these common sense experiences, and we have some evidence that there are some brain areas that are involved in making these kinds of assessments, um, that are happening unconsciously and sort of outside of our awareness of what's going on. And so it certainly doesn't seem all that implausible or strange to me to think that something might be going on like that in meditation. Because I've had those kind
Mm,
of experiences as well, where you're meditating and it's like, okay, so wait, it's already been an hour. Like, how could that have possibly happened? I was just looking at this
mm,
purple blob for like 5 minutes, it seemed like, and now like all this time has passed. So I think that it's not so mysterious to think that there's some sort of internal clock keeping system. Once you realize that the brain is kind of a largely rhythmic device in and of itself, there are areas as well, like the suprachiasmatic nucleus, if you know about that.
yeah.
So there that determine our circadian rhythms. So
Exactly.
I don't really see why those kinds of things wouldn't be part of the explanation for the thing you were just talking about.
Okay.
Um, and maybe you could have yourself experience yourself as being in a timeless state, because those processes are being messed with,
Mm,
because those are processes that are normally involved in our sense of time, so we're
yeah.
tweaking them. As an empirical prediction of that, it seems like you should be able to go in there and tweak them in the right way and and reproduce these kinds of experiences. Um, so I would say that that would be another kind of avenue for you
Okay.
know
Okay. One more question.
yeah.
Do you think that neuroscience is moving toward a true understanding of the brain, or are we just like refining useful paradigms?
Yeah, I don't think we're anywhere near a true understanding of the brain at this point.
Okay.
We don't have a
Agreed.
theory of what the brain does. That's why people like, predictive processing and these other sorts of things. So they think, oh, maybe this is like a theory of what the brain is really doing on a whole. We have
Hmm.
we have our metaphors that the brain is a computational process. But to me, it's interesting when you look back
Yeah.
on history. So I like contemporary neuroscience, but I also like history of neuroscience. And when you look back, there was a theory that people had about how the brain worked that they had for over 1,000 years. It was basically the idea that the brain was a hydraulic system and that the ventricles, the fluid
Yeah.
in the ventricles were somehow important for
Okay.
mental functioning. And they had identified each ventricle with a specific neural function. The one
Hmm.
ventricle for memory, another ventricle for sensory perception, another ventricle for etc. And that the fluids moving through the spinal cords and in the veins was how the body was moved. This was an idea that people kind of had like before the historical Jesus was born. So
Okay.
in the BC times, it is associated with the Galen, famous physician, early doctor Galen, who kind of refined it. And then all the way through the 1600s up until the 1700s, if you went to college, that's what you would learn. The brain is a hydraulic system. There are these fluids that get moved around. And of course, we look back on that now, and it's just like we're snickering, we're laughing, we're like,
Yeah.
these guys thought the ventricles were like hydraulic systems, like they thought you moved your arm by having fluid fill the arm up, like it just
Hmm.
completely ludicrous to us. But of course, it makes a lot of sense, because at the time their technology was limited to this sort of stuff. So a
Exactly.
lot of people thought that distillation, like when you take a liquid and boil it and you get this vapor, and then you can make
Hmm.
brandy from wine, or you can make whiskey from fermented grains. Uh, Wine being distilled into brandy was known by the ancient Greeks. So this was one of the oldest things that people knew how to do. And so when they looked inside the human brain and saw this chamber filled with liquid and all these tube-looking things going around everywhere, they thought to themselves, hey, this looks like a distillation chamber. It looks
Hmm.
exactly like the thing that we build. We put liquid over here. We have all these tubes going around. We heat it up, and this vapor arises, and it starts flowing around. Lo and behold, the body is warm. Hello, it's being heated up, perhaps. So,
Wow.
we laugh at them, but at the time, it was a perfectly reasonable empirical conjecture, which lasted for over 1,000 years
Yeah, that's
before
crazy.
people, found out that the heart was not a distillation chamber, which people thought that it was. And, in the 1700s, I think that they discovered this by boiling the heart and showing that it was just, turned white like muscle. So it wasn't special. And then, of course,
Yeah.
conclusively later on with the discovery of neural impulses and action potentials, so-called animal electricity, which
Hmm.
was by Galvani in the 1740s or whatever. So once that started happening, then people said, okay, so what's moving the body is these electrical impulses. And it's no mystery why people thought Frankenstein was brought to life by electricity, because at the time people were like, holy shit, you mean this
Yeah.
force of nature that we just discovered, electricity, is also up here in the brain? And so the reason why I like to go through that kind of little potted history there is because
Hmm.
it's not clear that something like that won't happen to us now. So
No.
we think action potentials are important, and that it's neural firing that's important. I'm not denying that. I think it is, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility that we discover some new force of nature and find out, oh wait, that's what's going on. So quantum mechanics is one possibility there, but also
Yeah.
dark matter, dark energy. We don't know half of the stuff
Yeah.
that's
We
going
don't know what
on.
we don't know.
Exactly.
I appreciate
So
your openness. I
yeah.
like it.
So I'm not saying that we should deny all of neuroscience. What I'm saying is that as a scientist, you have to be open and realize that most of the theories we've held have been overturned
Yeah.
by empirical results. And
No,
it
that's a good.
certainly could be
Yeah.
the case that 1,000 years from now, like for 2,000 years ago, Aristotle was saying the brain's a radiator. It's just these fluids circulate and they get cooled up there in all these noodles. And now we laugh at Aristotle, say what a jerk. But 2,000 years from now, in the year 5024, it's an open question, I think, whether the neuroscientists of that day look back on us and laugh and say, well, they thought the brain was a
Probably.
computer. Like, ha ha
Probably.
ha, what a bunch of idiots.
I don't
Well,
think you need to go that far ahead. Even I think it's gonna be like 100 years, 200 years.
Well, that's another
There's a.
possibility. On the other
Yeah.
hand, maybe they'll look back on us and say, "Oh yeah, the idea that the brain's a
Yeah.
computer, that was really what changed
Maybe.
everything." So I think that it's an open possibility, but we don't really know if the brain is a computer. It's kind of my
No.
long-winded way of saying is that this is one of our big ideas,
Yeah.
that it's a computational information processing system. But that
Mm.
could be like as laughably ridiculous as the idea that it's a distillation system.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
we'll have to see and
so we'll
find
have to
out.
wait and see. But yeah, I just
Yeah.
really think that neuroscience as a science didn't begin until the 1950s. So before
Yeah, it's very
that,
new.
neuroscience was just part of biology, and they treated the brain like any other organ. And
Yeah.
now there's a whole science devoted to just that. So it's only been going on for like 70 years, and in the history of science, that's a blink of the eye.
Yep.
So
Still a baby.
yeah, exactly. So I really think that all this stuff about, we don't know if consciousness could be physical. It's like, well, we don't know a lot of stuff about the brain. So it's really
Yeah.
too early to rule out all of these sort of views.
Well, on this topic, what's the most surprising discovery in neuroscience that you've encountered, and like what philosophical implications did it have for you?
I mean, yeah, I think that's all very surprising. Even the fact that there are neurons is very surprising. I always tell this story, but I remember when I was going to college, my mom, I was telling her about the neuroscience I was learning. I was like, yeah, there's these, did you know about neurons and 86 billion of them and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, wait, those things are in my head. And I was like, yeah. And then she called me the next day and she was like, Richard, I can't stop thinking about these things in my head, these neurons. Like, what are they doing there? I was like,
Don't
oh,
tell her about the bacteria that lives on
yeah.
her body.
Well, exactly. Yeah,
Or
exactly.
all the insects in her eyebrows or
Exactly.
beard or
Exactly. So
yeah.
I think that the
Oh.
whole idea that the brain is made up of 86 billion interconnected parts is very surprising, not what you would expect from your conscious experience. But not the most surprising thing. For me, I would say the most surprising thing was various disorders like blind sight, for example, which strongly suggest that there's unconscious processing involved in behavioral control, and that we don't really necessarily require conscious experience to act in the world the way that we do. That there's two different systems in the brain, one using visual information to identify what's out there, and the other using visual information to control behavior, the so-called
Yeah.
ventral and dorsal pathways, which I think is very surprising. The idea that my visual experience is not necessarily required in order for me to reach out and grab a coffee cup.
Yeah, that's wacky. That's wacky. That's kooky. I remember when I read about that as well. It's like the different types of disorders where like you can see something and you know what it is, but you can't write it, or
Yeah,
you can or paint it,
exactly.
or you see something and
That's
you know what it is, but you can't name it. Like
exactly.
these things are so weird. They're
And you would have never
so weird.
predicted that, I would say, from
No.
so, when I was young, people thought you could study psychology without knowing about the brain. And people actually had principal reasons for that. They would say, the
Okay.
brain's not interesting with respect to psychology. It's this the higher level functioning that we're interested in. But I just think that you can't say that anymore. And we've learned more about the mind by studying the brain um, than these other avenues. So to me, that all of these agnosias that you're mentioning, yes, exactly. So visual form agnosia, super
Yeah.
surprising. Akinetopsia, so people can lose color
Exactly.
experience. Achromatopsia, they can lose motion experience. You would have never
Mm.
thought naively that your experience has these different components which can come apart in that way. So to me, that seems very striking. And philosophically, I think it's important for many reasons, but primarily because what it suggests is that our sense of the unity of experience, the unity of consciousness, that there's all this that's just out there in the world waiting for
Mm.
me to discover it, is kind of called into question. Our experience is determined by these individual components of the brain working in tandem with each other. Um, and so we can't take our naive intuitions too seriously because
Agree.
naively it doesn't seem that way at all. It seems like
Nope.
everything's right there, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's all these little pieces. So to me, that's one of the main reasons I have for being very suspicious of intuitions in
Yeah.
philosophy and people saying, well, intuitively it's this way, therefore it is, when we just have um, so many
Examples of it
counterexamples.
being maybe not the opposite, but just
Yeah,
yeah, not on the right path at all.
exactly. Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
on this note, what do you think about Wim Hof? No, not Wim Hof. Donald Hoff. Sure.
Oh, Donald Hoffman.
Hoffman. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I mean, I'm familiar with his views. I don't really think that he draws the right conclusion from what
Okay.
he takes physics to be discovering. So to me, it's he goes too far. But I mean, it's
Okay.
interesting. Yeah. Why are you interested in that stuff?
A bit, yeah, but I'm just interested. It's not that I religiously follow him or anything. It's just that I think it's interesting that people have different takes and different avenues that they're gonna try to explore, and I hope the best for them. Everyone who's
Yeah.
trying, I just want to see the endeavor being taken as far as it can, and how it matches with everything.
Yeah. I
So
agree.
yeah, I'm just interested in on this take where your intuition might not be right when he says like, yeah, nothing you think is right because you're not perceiving the true reality or whatever. Like we're not evolved to perceive reality. We're evolved to perceive fitness or utility.
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting because I'm kind of interested in the more esoteric, like Buddhism and stuff like that. So, and it ties together with that it's more of an illusion. Um, yeah, I just wanted to see where you stand on that,
Yeah.
and if you had anything to say about it.
I mean, yeah. So I think that part of Hoffman is he's right. I think he's right about that. That evolution doesn't select us for perceiving the way reality is.
Mm.
I mean, I don't know about you, but when I found out about like electromagnetic radiation, I was like so pissed off. So I was like, wait a minute, the visible spectrum is just one small part of this
Yeah,
giant,
to me, that's
enormous.
just magic. That's actually just real life magic, and we don't know that much about it. I think, like you said earlier, maybe the like progress in quantum will lead to something. Progress in computers will lead to something. I think progress in understanding the electric magnetic fields will probably shift our perceptions of things.
It could be.
Maybe we don't know, but probably maybe it's dark matter, antimatter. I don't know, but it seems like there's something there. Like there's a lot there, and it's so wide, and it's like macro and micro, so it's in everything. So I
Yeah.
don't know. It's interesting.
No, I agree. And I mean, I was more talking perceptually that I was angry that I couldn't perceive all of these things.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I was like,
Even
I
like
want to be
that.
able to see it. You mean bees can see an ultraviolet light. And
That
I
would
was
be
like, what
dope.
the hell, man? I want to see an ultraviolet light too. Like, there's all this stuff that's invisible to me, but it's out
Yeah.
there. I just found that to be incredibly annoying to me.
Yeah. I get
Yes,
that. I
very
get
twitchy.
that.
And perceptually, it doesn't seem that way at all. It seems like everything out there in the world is directly visible to me. But most of those
Yeah.
things that are in the room that I'm sitting in right now are invisible to me, insensible to me.
Nope.
So I find that to be kind of an insult, actually. And that I'm sort of into transhumanism and those sorts of things. So I very
Okay.
much want to augment my senses and those sort of things. But anyway, so most of what's out there in reality, we don't perceive.
Okay.
That much I think is true.
Yeah.
So that
Kind of
evolution,
hard to argue against that.
yeah, evolution selects for the reason we see colors is one theory. The theory I think is most plausible is that we see the colors that we do because our primate ancestors ate a lot of fruit,
Yep.
and to see a
Flowers and
banana
fruit
as
and
yellow versus
plants.
green is very important for that.
Yeah.
And a tomato that's ripe versus a tomato that's unripe. So bees, they don't eat a lot of fruit, so their ultraviolet vision is useful for them for gathering nectar.
Yeah.
It allows them to determine whether a flower has nectar in it more readily. So and also roosters see an ultraviolet light. That's how they know when to crow before the sun comes up because they can
Wait,
see
what?
the
They
UV.
do?
Yeah,
Damn.
they see the
Okay.
UV spectrum, so they can see the UV light
Okay.
before the visible
Oh,
light,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's why
Okay,
they're
okay,
always
okay.
cockadoodling at that time. Um,
Yeah,
and that's why
makes
sometimes they
sense.
crow at all hours of the night and stuff like that because they're picking up on UV light from man-made objects and things of that nature. So
Okay.
anyway, so there's lots of animals are amazing and they have all these sensory capacities, and evolution seems to select the sensory capacities which are useful for that organism. So
Mm,
that reality, perception is not designed by evolution to put us in contact with reality, except for insofar as it puts us in contact with useful properties for creatures like us.
so, yeah.
Now, from there, though, I think that Hoffman goes overboard when he starts
Okay.
talking about fundamental physics, and the idea that space time might be emergent and these other more um, theoretical ideas about fundamental physics, and therefore argues for a kind of idealism, or that that we have to sort of abandon ordinary physicalist views and stuff of that nature. So
Mm,
that's where I think he goes too far.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I want to ask some more personal questions, if that's okay.
Sure. I mean, yeah. Go ahead. I see some other
Uh,
people in the chat, so maybe I'll give you a couple more questions and then I'll focus back on that
okay. What chat? Where do you see the chat?
on YouTube.
Ah, okay, because I'm in Zoom. Okay, okay. Okay, one last question then. When did you know that you wanted to walk this avenue that you're walking right now, and how was that experience for you?
You mean being a philosopher and that
Yeah,
sort of things?
yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. So I didn't start going to college until I was late in my 20s. I
Okay,
didn't, no one in my family ever went to college. My parents didn't graduate from high school. So I didn't really know that you could. As a matter of fact, I was always interested in science ever since I was young. I thought I wanted to be a physicist. Um, my mom, my family that I grew up in was very religious, so I was raised in a very religious household. And
okay.
I just never found any of that stuff plausible. Like from the moment that they started telling me this stuff, I was just like, oh, it doesn't seem reasonable. It doesn't seem right. So I was always arguing. They would take me and try to do Sunday school, church, all that stuff,
Hmm.
Bible study. I mean, we read the Bible a lot when I was little, and I just always found it extremely implausible. So I was always arguing with them. A lot of stuff I recognize later as being stuff people talk about in philosophy, like the divine hiddenness. Why is God, not in the world the way he used to be, allegedly? The problem of evil, what explains suffering? The
Yeah,
consistency of divine attributes. How can you be all knowing and all powerful? And isn't there a contradiction that arises therein? Whether the God of the Bible can be the source of morality because he seems like kind of an asshole who's amoral, if not immoral. So a lot of what I was doing was philosophy. I didn't realize it. I just was arguing with these religious people a lot.
yeah.
And my mom was like a very spiritual religious person. We went to many different churches. So I went to we went to Buddhist temple, we went to a synagogue, we went to Church of the Nazarene, we went to a Catholic church, Jehovah's Witness, you name it. So we went all around. I guess not Muslims. No one knew any Muslims back then, but in my area of the neck of the woods. But definitely Buddhism, Baha'i faith. She took me to one of those. So anyway, so I was exposed at a kind of early age to a lot of these like claims about the nature of reality, and I just was like, found them implausible, arguing and so forth and so on. So I didn't know that meant I wanted to be a philosopher. I thought it meant I was interested in science. I wanted to be a physicist.
Yeah.
And then when I was young, like when I got a little bit older, I thought, well, I want to go to Caltech or Harvey Mudd, study physics. And then I found out that I've always been good at math, but I was just good enough at math to realize I'm not good enough at math.
Okay. Interesting.
So I
Okay.
sort of realized that if I really wanted to go and study physics, you need to be better at math.
Yeah.
I'm not bad at it, but I'm not like, I can't function at that level, to be
Yeah.
honest. So it takes me a while to work my way through some of this stuff. I can kind of understand it, but I can't grasp it intuitively, not in the way that I saw people doing.
Yeah.
And then I found out about philosophy by taking a required class at a community college that I was attending. And I was like, wait a minute, this is what I really was supposed to be doing this whole time. The physics stuff I was interested in was about the nature of reality and what our
Yeah.
place in it is. The religious stuff I was arguing about was about what the nature of reality is and how do we
Yeah.
know. So these were all philosophical topics. And so from the moment I took my first philosophy class, which I believe was in 1996, and I was in my late 20s at that time because I'm old. At that point, I was like, this is what I want to do.
You
I
found your place.
just found instantly. I was like, this.
Yeah.
I don't. I just want to be a part of this conversation. I never thought of myself as having some grand. I wasn't going to be like a Descartes or Kant, but I wanted to be in the group of people that could argue with Descartes and Kant, that could like hang
Okay.
around and be like, hey, what about this? Hey, what
What
about that?
about okay.
And I just never looked back. So it was very naive. I had no idea what it meant to be a philosopher, like professionally, how to get a job. I mean, I did get one. I do teach philosophy. I do publish and have books and articles and so forth and so on. But at that time, I just had no clue whatsoever. I mean, I was, it's a long story short, but I was arrested as a kid, was in juvenile hall, got into lots of fights, was very, uh, angry at the world, the
Okay.
world that I found. I didn't understand like why people were such the way that they were,
Yeah.
and it just made me angry. So I didn't know how to deal with it. And like I said, I was like raised in this very strict religious household. I was also physically abused, and so long story. So what I was, someone in juvenile hall. I was reading about string theory and
Okay.
thinking about that. I was very interested in that sort of stuff, and it never really occurred to me that, I mean, that's white privilege. I would say that it just never really occurred to me that this is a ludicrous thing to do. That someone like me, being from my background, raised by a single mom on welfare in juvenile hall at the time, that this was
Reading about string theory. Yeah.
that this was a ludicrous thing to do. It just seemed like this is what I wanted to do. And then when I found philosophy, I was like, okay, I want to be a philosopher. I want to be a professor. And it never occurred to me that this was like unrealistic, or I was like, it's either this or death. Like there's no in between. Like what else am I going to do? Work at McDonald's for the rest of my life? Like that's basically the level I was at that point.
And that's
So it was tough, but I've been lucky enough to, study with interesting people. I've had, very fortunate to find myself amongst the big names of our time and to be in the room when they're having these conversations. So um, I would say it's worked out okay. It's mostly through luck and a lot of privilege. Even though it feels weird saying that because my background, I didn't feel anything like privileged at the time. But I was obviously I could get a haircut and put on a tie, and people thought, oh, just another white guy from Connecticut. He obviously belongs here. And they never would have thought by looking at me that I was, in juvenile hall and kind of had a delinquent background in that sense. And that's the white privilege part, is that, people just assume you belong here because you're just kind of nice looking white guy who seems smart. And by seeming smart, usually what that means is you're loud and obnoxious. Because there is a kind of tendency to seem smart. And I definitely didn't realize I had that because, you come off as arrogant and obnoxious, and a lot of people say, hey, he must know what he's doing. So anyway, I had that going for me. It was still an uphill battle, and being in academia with the kind of background I have, it's hard. Like where I come from, people talk to each other in a certain way, and if you don't, then you're going to get in a fight. And it's like you go in
Yeah.
here, and people are talking in a certain way. It's like, why aren't you having a bloody nose by now? Like you should be punched.
Yeah,
But
different worlds.
yeah, it's a different world. So it was some adjustment. But nonetheless, like I say, I teach at a community college currently, and part of
Okay.
the reason why I do that is obviously because I got the job, but also because I came from a community college, and
Yeah.
I very much believe that there are people like me out there, people who are smart and interested, and just having a hard time, fitting into getting to where they want to go. And community
Yeah.
colleges play an important role in that. And so I
Definitely.
think that's an important aspect of our educational system is that we have these avenues.
Yeah. That's
Um,
beautiful.
anyway, so I
Thank you
don't know
for
if that
sharing.
answers your question or not.
Yes, it definitely did. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no
It
worries.
was nice to hear that.
Cool. Uh-oh, I'm hearing rumblings downstairs actually, so my children might be home from their karate. Um, but it's been very nice talking with you, and I'm glad that you stopped by. Uh,
Thank, thank you for this opportunity. It's been amazing.
yeah, I try to hang out every once in a while. I have a series I do where I interview people, um, and then I also try to just have these kind of open discussions because I'm interested in what people think, and
Hmm.
I tend to think of philosophy in general as requiring interacting with other people. That I have
Hmm.
this view where I think of like when I'm talking to you, I'm trying to figure out like what's wrong with my views by treating you as like an inner monologue, like a better,
Exactly.
smarter version of me. So I want to
Yeah.
hear the pushback so I know what the
Yeah.
arguments are to adjust my own
Exactly.
view. So I think it's very important
Okay.
to have
Yeah,
these
I
open
have the
conversations.
exactly same view actually.
Oh, wow.
It's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, very cool.
Nice. Okay. Well, I'm gonna. Yeah, I got you here on YouTube now, and I'm gonna look you up and listen to some of your talks because it's been interesting.
Cool. Yeah, feel free to stop back around.
Thank you. Okay, man. Enjoy your day. Have a
Thanks.
wonderful day.
Bye.
Take care.
Yeah, I do sort of have to go at this point, but I wanted to say something about some of the things that I saw coming up in the chat before I do go. So I think where was I down around where Pooja came in? Which Pooja was saying anyone whose work comes close to solving the meta problem. Yeah, I think we have lots of ways of solving the meta problem, actually. Oh, yeah. All right, guys. I think I'm going to have to cut this off. I'll come back, though. I see there's things that I didn't address down there, but I'll try to do more of these because I really enjoy the input and hanging out, talking philosophy. So sorry for people in the chat whose name I didn't get to. I do see someone mentioning Barry Dainton. That's a good idea, actually. Barry would be someone definitely worth talking to on Consciousness Live. So questions about the book. The book will be out next year. Um, it should be out in March or April at this point. I'm in the proof editing stage. Do I study Islamic philosophy? Yes, I do. I'm interested in Islamic philosophy. Um, uh, ask a question in the Zoom. I wish I did have time to actually have you ask a question in the Zoom, but I do have to go at this point. So I'll come back. I'll schedule another one of these. So feel free to come back at that time and jump in the Zoom. But I have screaming children downstairs, so I'm gonna have to end this, guys. Thanks for hanging out. Sorry I didn't get to everybody, but I'll definitely make sure to do more of these in the future. Yes, Crep. Um, recommendations for intentionality. So if I already mentioned Fodor, I already mentioned Ruth Milliken. Um, Tim Crane, I'd say, is another good one. Um, send me an email. My email is winmorebrown@gmail, and I'll happily send you some other recommendations. All right, guys. I wish I could hang out longer, but I do have to head out. So I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.